Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a heavy one today.
It really is. So I want you to picture this. A man stands in a courtroom holding a sharpened knife.
Right.
And he is legally entitled by the court to carve exactly 1 pound of flesh from the chest of his greatest enemy.
Which, I mean, that sounds like a premise for a modern horror film, right? Or some kind of thriller.
Totally. But it's actually one of the most sophisticated, agonizing treatises on justice, on trauma, and societal hypocrisy that's ever been written.
It's a masterpiece.
Today, we are focusing our lens on a text that has stirred up, intense debate and fierce introspection for over 400 years. William Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice.
And we really have to tread carefully here because it's a minefield of human emotion.
Oh, absolutely. But we aren't walking into this deep dive alone.
Right.
We are bringing along a brilliant, really sharp-tongued 19th century guide.
Yes, the renowned essayist and romantic critic William Hazlitt.
Exactly. His commentary on this play completely shifted how audiences understand its characters, right? Like, he changed the game.
He did. He refused to see them as just, flat archetypes on a stage.
Right. So our mission today is to act as your guides through this incredibly dense material. We want to extract the practical wisdom and the life applications from a 16th century masterpiece.
Because frankly, this play isn't just about a pound of flesh.
No, it's a mirror. It's reflecting our own struggles with the tension between justice and mercy, the masks we wear to survive, and, well, the monsters we create through our own prejudices. Okay, let's unpack this.
That framing is essential, because if we treat The Merchant of Venice simply as some dusty relic of Elizabethan theater...
Like something you just read in high school and forget about.
Exactly. If we do that, we miss the terrifying reality that the core drivers of this story, ego, resentment, the desire for revenge, they haven't changed one iota in 4 centuries.
They are so fundamentally human.
Hazlitt understood this brilliantly. I mean, he's writing in the early 19th century, which is an era wrestling with its own revolutions. Right?
Shifting concepts of human rights and all that.
Spot on. And he looked at this play and saw flesh and blood humans trapped in systems of their own making.
The capacity for self-deception is just everywhere in this text.
It really is.
Yeah.
So our goal here is to constantly tether these ancient words to the psychological realities we all face today.
Right. Examining not just what these characters do, but the underlying mechanisms of why they do it.
Exactly.
So I want to dive straight into one of the most famous psychological tests in literary history.
The caskets.
Yes, the caskets. We have Portia, who is this incredibly wealthy, highly intelligent heiress living in the idyllic estate of Belmont.
But she is completely trapped.
Right. She is bound by the bizarre will of her dead father. She can't choose who she wants to marry, nor can she refuse a suitor she absolutely despises.
Her entire fate is tied to a lottery.
A really high-stakes game. Any man who wants her hand has to choose between 3 chests or caskets.
One made of gold, one of silver, and one of lead.
And if he picks the right one, he marries her. If he picks the wrong one, he is bound by oath to never marry anyone. Ever.
It is a profound mechanism of control from beyond the grave, sure, but it also serves as a filter.
A filter for what, exactly?
Well, it's designed to weed out specific human flaws. Portia's father constructed a test that preys on cognitive biases.
Oh, it's fascinating. Walk us through that.
Let's look at the first trap, right? The Prince of Morocco. He arrives, dripping with status, and is immediately drawn to the gold casket.
Naturally. Because the inscription on it reads, "Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire."
And Morocco falls into a very common psychological snare here. He reasons that Portia is what all the world desires.
Right, he says, "A golden mind stoops not to shows of dross."
Exactly. He assumes that the greatest prize in the world must naturally be housed within the most universally lusted after material.
But when he unlocks it, he doesn't get Portia's portrait.
No, he gets a brutal wake-up call.
He gets a skull with a scroll shoved into its empty eye socket reading, "All that glisters is not gold." It's such a visceral image, right? Like, why a skull?
Because death is the ultimate equalizer for those who chase pure status.
Wow, yeah.
Gold represents the superficial metrics of success that society collectively agrees upon.
So the skull is a reminder that when you build your entire life around acquiring what many men desire...
Purely because other people desire it, mind you.
Right, you end up with something entirely devoid of life. It is the hollow pursuit of envy.
That's exactly it. And then we get the Prince of Aragon, who walks in and completely bypasses the gold.
But he doesn't do it out of humility or wisdom, right? He does it out of staggering elitism.
Oh, massive ego on this guy.
He reads the gold inscription about what many men desire and essentially says, I refuse to be lumped in with the barbarous multitudes.
He desperately wants to distinguish himself from the masses, so he goes for the silver casket.
Which reads, who chooseth me shall get as much as he deserves.
And this is where the psychological mechanism gets incredibly dangerous. Aragon operates on what modern psychology calls the just world fallacy.
Which is the belief that people get exactly what they deserve.
Exactly. He assumes his high birth and his refined tastes are evidence of his intrinsic moral superiority.
He literally says, I will assume desert.
Yeah, he believes his external societal advantages are a perfect reflection of his internal worth.
Talk about a blind spot. And what does he find inside the silver casket?
The portrait of a blinking idiot? A fool's head?
And a note telling him that the world is full of fools who think their shadows are made of silver.
The silver trap is the illusion of pure meritocracy.
When you convince yourself that you deserve the very best simply because of your pedigree or your resume.
Or just your inflated ego, you blind yourself to your own foolishness. You mistake privilege for character.
I hear that, but let's play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
The man who finally wins the game is Bassanio. He chooses the dull lead casket, which carries the blunt warning, who chooseth me must give and hazard all he hath.
Right, the ultimate risk.
And we're supposed to applaud him for this. But isn't Bassanio a massive hypocrite?
How so?
Well, he delivers this beautiful speech about not being deceived by shiny things, but the entire reason he is in Belmont choosing a casket is to marry a billionaire heiress so he can pay off his massive debts.
That's a fair point.
I mean, he is literally chasing gold.
That is a phenomenal piece of pushback, and it really highlights Shakespeare's genius. Shakespeare rarely gives us pure heroes.
No, they're always a mess.
Exactly. Bassanio is absolutely a flawed, financially reckless opportunist. But the text asks us to separate his flawed motivations from the profound truth he articulates in that moment.
Okay, so let's look at the mechanism of his realization then.
When he stands before the caskets, he doesn't rely on what the world desires, and he doesn't rely on his own ego. He deconstructs the very concept of outward appearances.
Right. He says, the world is still deceived with ornament.
And he gives some incredibly sharp examples of that deception.
Yeah, he says, in law, a completely corrupt and tainted plea can be hidden if it's delivered with a gracious, seasoned voice.
And in religion, a damned error can be blessed with the text, hiding the grossness with fair ornament.
It's all about hiding the truth.
Notice the underlying theme in his examples. It's the weaponization of aesthetics.
Wow, the weaponization of aesthetics. I love that phrasing.
He talks about cowards whose hearts are as false as stairs of sand, but who grow these fierce beards of Hercules to look intimidating.
While inside, their livers are white as milk.
Exactly. He recognizes what he calls seeming truth, which cunning times put on to entrap the wisest.
He understands that ornament, the gold, the silver, the gracious voice, the fierce beard, is just the guiled shore to a most dangerous sea.
This translates so seamlessly to our current moment.
Oh, 100%. When I look at the gold casket, I don't just see 16th century greed. I see the carefully curated aesthetic of modern social media.
The constant pursuit of what many men desire, right?
Yes. The luxury vacations, the flawless filtered existence, the obsessive tracking of likes and followers.
We are told that if a life looks golden on the outside, it must be valuable on the inside.
But when you crack open that hyper-curated existence, you often find the skull. It's a performance of life, utterly lacking in actual vitality.
And the silver casket is the modern trap of the elite resume.
The LinkedIn culture.
Exactly, where we conflate our job titles, our degrees, and our credit scores with our fundamental human worth. We look at our accolades and say, like Aragon, I assume desert.
Which makes the lead casket so terrifying and necessary today. Give and hazard all he hath.
It's the absolute antithesis of modern consumer culture.
We want guarantees. We want return policies on our relationships, our investments, and our life choices.
We want the algorithm to promise us a specific outcome.
But the wisdom embedded in this ancient text is telling us that true substance, true love, true meaning, true connection requires a massive, unglamorous risk.
It demands vulnerability. It demands that you put skin in the game.
You don't get to stand back and admire lead. You have to commit to its heavy, dull reality.
If we look closely, Shakespeare is contrasting the visual with the visceral.
Oh, that's it.
Gold and silver appeal to the eye and the ego. Lead appeals to the soul's willingness to be exposed and broken. Choosing lead isn't a transaction, it's a surrender.
So, if you are listening to this and mapping it onto your own life, the practical reflection you have to ask yourself is this. Where are you choosing the shiny gold of external validation over the dull lead that actually requires you to be vulnerable?
Right. Are you chasing a career path because it sounds impressive at dinner parties, or because it demands something real and authentic from you?
Are you curating a relationship for the photographs? Or are you willing to give and hazard all in the messy, frustrating, beautiful reality of actually knowing another human being?
We have to stop being deceived by ornament.
Absolutely. But that illusion of ornament doesn't just stop at physical objects or societal status, right?
No, the brilliance of this text is how it transitions from the literal masks of the caskets to the behavioral masks that people wear in their everyday lives to protect themselves.
Yes, and this is where we have to bring in Graziano.
Oh, Graziano.
In the very first scene of the play, we meet Antonio the merchant. He is wealthy, he is respected, but he's deeply, inexplicably depressed.
He opens the play by saying, "In sooth, I know not why I am so sad."
He goes on to say he holds the world as a stage where every man must play a part, and his is a sad one.
Enter Graziano.
Right, who is the loud, boisterous, slightly obnoxious friend of the group. Graziano completely rejects Antonio's gloomy performance.
He says, "Let me play the fool. With mirth and laughter, let old wrinkles come."
And Hazlitt has a fascinating observation about this exact moment, doesn't he?
He does. He points out that Graziano, even though he is positioned as the secondary jester character, actually speaks a whole volume of wisdom here.
Right.
Graziano observes Antonio's melancholy and diagnoses it not as a genuine clinical depression, but as a form of social performance.
He says there are a sort of men whose faces do cream and mantle like a standing pond.
I am obsessed with that imagery, a standing pond.
Stagnant, scummy, unmoving.
It perfectly captures the aesthetic of manufactured seriousness. Graziano says these men entertain a willful stillness.
They deliberately put on a grim, serious face, with the specific purpose of being dressed in an opinion of wisdom, gravity, profound conceit.
They want to look like deep thinkers.
Graziano mimics them, saying they act as if to declare, "I am Sir Oracle, and when I ope my lips, let no dog bark." Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Isn't Graziano basically calling out fake intellectuals?
What's fascinating here is that Graziano is exposing the exact mechanism of intellectual posturing. He says, "No, I know these guys. They are only reputed wise for saying nothing. If they actually open their mouths, they would sound like fools."
I know these people. We all know these people.
Oh, absolutely.
He's pointing to a guy in the boardroom who stays perfectly silent, looking intensely troubled by the data, just so everyone else will whisper, "Wow, he must be thinking something really profound."
And the psychological insight here is profound because Graziano explains why people do this.
Right.
He warns Antonio, "But fish not with this melancholy bait. For this full gudgeon, this opinion, a gudgeon is a small, gullible fish."
So Graziano is explaining that this performance of sadness, this heavy, grave demeanor, is just cheap bait used to catch the cheapest of prizes.
Yeah.
Public opinion.
And we fall for that bait constantly today.
We really do. We equate seriousness with intelligence. We equate a furrowed brow with depth.
Think about corporate culture.
Oh, man. There's this performative gravity we all feel pressured to put on.
Right. If you are having too much fun at work, if you are laughing, there is a subtle assumption that you aren't taking your job seriously.
That you aren't a true thought leader. We are terrified of being seen as the fool, so we put on the mask of Sir Oracle.
We use convoluted jargon to sound smarter than we are.
We send emails at 2 a.m. to look perpetually busy.
We adopt this willful stillness to mask our own insecurities.
It's exhausting. And against that exhausting performance, Graziano offers a radically different philosophy of life.
He says, "Let my liver rather heat with wine than my heart cool with mortifying groans."
In the medical understanding of the 16th century, the liver was the seat of passion, and groans were thought to literally drain blood from the heart.
He is advocating for a life that is actually lived in the blood and the body, not just performed in the mind.
Why sit like your grandfather carved in alabaster? Why sleep when you are awake? Why give yourself jaundice by being constantly peevish?
It's a call to joy as an act of rebellion against a superficial society.
Stop equating seriousness with profundity. Challenge yourself to drop the performative gravity you might be using to protect your ego.
If you are fishing with melancholy bait just to get people to think you are deep, cut the line.
Yes. It's better to play the fool and keep your heart warm than to freeze yourself into a statue of wisdom.
But Graciano's warning about behavioral masks isn't just about individuals at a party trying to look smart.
No, it goes much deeper.
When an entire society puts on a mask of moral superiority to hide its own cruelty, you get the Rialto.
You get the systemic machine that created Shylock.
And this brings us to the most complex, difficult, and enduring dynamic in the entire text.
The relationship between the Christian merchant, Antonio, and the Jewish moneylender, Shylock.
We have to unpack this incredibly carefully because the history here is heavy, the emotions run high, and the text is unflinching in its brutality.
We really need to set the historical and human context here. And to be clear, we are approaching this completely impartially, looking strictly at the text and human behavior, not endorsing any political views.
Right. So we are in 16th century Venice. The Rialto is the absolute center of global commerce.
You have Antonio, who lends money gratis without charging interest,
which brings down the overall rate of usance, or interest, in Venice.
This directly threatens Shylock's livelihood, as moneylending was one of the very few professions legally open to Jewish people in Venice at the time.
But the economic tension is just the thin veneer over a vicious, normalized system of else.
We must be absolutely clear about the facts established in the text itself. Shylock is subjected to intense physical and verbal abuse by Antonio and his friends.
He is spat upon, he is spurned, he is repeatedly called a dog.
And yet, when Antonio overextends his finances because all his wealth is tied up in merchant ships currently at sea,
and he desperately needs liquid cash to help Bassanio woo Portia,
where does he go? He goes directly to Shylock to ask for a massive loan of 3,000 ducats.
This is where William Hazlitt's commentary from the 19th century slices through the traditional, comfortable readings of the play.
Because prior to Hazlitt, audiences often viewed Shylock simply as a comic villain or a pure monster.
But Hazlitt completely reframes him. He argues that Shylock is a good hater, and crucially, a man no less sinned against than sinning.
Hazlitt points out the staggering cognitive dissonance of the Venetians here.
They literally spit on this man, trample his dignity, isolate him, and then turn around and appeal to him for a financial favor.
Hazlitt calls this the rankest hypocrisy or the blindest prejudice.
Let's look closely at the text of that encounter on the Rialto, because the psychological mechanism of the oppressor is laid bare.
Shylock reminds Antonio of the abuse. He says, "You called me a misbeliever, a cutthroat dog, you spat on my Jewish gabardine, and now you want my money."
What should I say to you? Should a dog lend you 3,000 ducats?
Now, a modern reader expects Antonio, the supposed protagonist, to feel a shred of shame or to apologize now that he needs a lifeline.
Instead, Antonio doubles down.
He looks Shylock in the eye and says, "I am as like to call thee so again, to spit on thee again, to spurn thee too."
It is genuinely shocking to read.
It is. Antonio's telling the man he's begging for money, "I will continue to abuse you the moment this transaction is over."
It completely shatters the archetype of the noble merchant. It exposes a deeply ingrained, unquestioned superiority complex.
Antonio cannot even comprehend that Shylock possesses a humanity worthy of respect.
And this is where we must exercise wisdom with discernment. We're analyzing this dynamic strictly by focusing on the human element and the text provided.
The enduring wisdom here is recognizing how a society creates its own monsters through systemic marginalization.
Exactly. The historical limitation of this text is the normalized cruelty of the Venetian merchants, a cruelty that Shakespeare portrays with unblinking, uncomfortable realism.
Shylock's reaction, the intense, lodged hate he bears Antonio, does not exist in a vacuum.
As Hazlitt notes, the constant apprehension of being reviled and trampled on might be supposed to sour the most forbearing nature and take away the milk of human kindness.
Hazlitt writes that the desire for revenge is almost inseparable from the sense of wrong.
And because of this horrific ongoing treatment, Shylock doesn't just ask for interest on the loan. He sets a trap.
He demands a bond. If Antonio cannot repay the 3,000 ducats on the exact day specified, Shylock is legally entitled to cut a pound of flesh from Antonio's body from nearest his heart.
The choice of flesh is vital to understand here. Why not seize Antonio's house? Why not demand triple the money?
Because Shylock isn't looking for financial compensation, is he?
No, he is looking for a visceral restoration of power. The Venetians have treated him as something subhuman, a dog.
By demanding a pound of flesh, he is reducing the elite, untouchable Antonio to mere meat.
He is forcing the physical reality of mortality onto a man who thought he was a god.
And of course, Antonio's ships are lost at sea. He defaults on the bond.
And simultaneously, Shylock's daughter, Jessica, has run away, stealing his money and eloping with a Christian.
trading his dead wife's ring for a monkey.
Shylock is pushed to the absolute brink of grief, rage, and madness.
And Salarino, one of Antonio's friends, mocks him and asks what good a pound of Antonio's flesh will actually do him.
And Shylock delivers a defense of his own humanity that challenges the listener's comfort zone, even today.
I want to read a significant portion of it because the rhetorical construction is just a masterpiece.
Please do.
Shylock says, "He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies. And what's his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions? Fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is. If you prick us, do we not bleed?"
Let's deconstruct the sheer logic of this speech. It is an escalation of irrefutable facts designed to shatter the Venetians' cognitive dissonance.
It begins by demanding recognition of basic biological reality. Eyes, hands, organs.
We share the same physical dimensions. Then it moves to emotional and sensory equality, affections, passions.
Then it moves to shared vulnerability.
Yeah.
Subject to the same diseases, warmed by the same summer, bleeding when pricked.
He is holding up a mirror and forcing the Venetians to acknowledge the shared human condition that they have so violently, persistently denied him.
But the speech doesn't end there. And this is the obstacle to growth for modern audiences.
How do you mean?
We want our victims to be perfect, don't we? We want the marginalized person to rise above their oppression, to be a saint, to offer forgiveness and teach their oppressors a lesson in grace.
We want a neat, inspiring narrative.
But Shylock is not a saint. He is a man consumed by the acid of his own trauma.
Exactly, because after establishing absolute human equality, Shylock drives the logic to its terrifying, inevitable conclusion.
Right.
He argues that if we are identical in body and emotion, we must be identical in our capacity for cruelty.
He says, if a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be by Christian example? Why, revenge.
The villainy you teach me I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction.
I will better the instruction. That line is haunting.
It is. He's saying, you wrote the textbook on cruelty, you taught me how to be a monster, and I have been an excellent student.
Now I am going to take your lessons, apply them, and outdo you.
Think about how this mechanism of radicalization translates flawlessly to modern realities.
It really does. When a group or an individual is constantly marginalized, when they are treated as an outsider, denied basic dignity, and subjected to systemic hypocrisy, the inevitable result is not sudden enlightenment.
The result is a mirror reflecting that same hostility back at society, often magnified.
Shylock is the physical embodiment of Venice's own toxicity coming home to roost.
The society engineered its own disruption by failing to recognize the humanity of its neighbors.
The reflection, for anyone listening, is deeply uncomfortable but entirely necessary. Who, in our modern worldview, has been alienated to the point of resentment?
Have we written people off, treated them with contempt, or denied them empathy, only to act shocked when they react with hostility?
How do our own actions, our own hypocrisies, better the instruction of villainy in others?
When we withhold humanity from someone, we are actively participating in the creation of the very behavior we condemn.
We hand them the knife.
Which sets the stage for the absolute climax of the play.
We have this unstoppable force of Shylock's justified yet horrific desire for revenge, hurtling toward the immovable object of Venetian law.
The cycle of vengeance culminates in the courtroom. Antonio is bared. Shylock is standing there, literally sharpening his knife on the sole of his shoe, demanding his pound of flesh.
How do we break the cycle of violence when strict, unyielding justice threatens to destroy us?
Enter Portia.
Right. She has disguised herself as a young, male legal scholar named Balthazar, arriving to judge the case.
She assesses the bond, realizes it is legally sound, and attempts to appeal to something higher than the law.
She delivers the legendary speech on the nature of mercy.
The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes.
Portia's argument is fundamentally theological. She argues that mercy is an attribute of God himself, and earthly power doth then show likest gods when mercy seasons justice.
Her most potent point, designed to break Shylock's reliance on the bond, is this. Though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation.
She is pointing out that if the universe operated strictly on a system of getting exactly what we deserve, the pure, unforgiving justice of the silver casket, every single human being would be condemned.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we all rely on unearned mercy to survive our own flaws.
Hold on, I'm struggling with this. I know this is considered one of the most beautiful speeches in the English language, but let's look at the context. Isn't Portia being incredibly hypocritical here?
Let's push that further. What do you mean?
Well, Shylock actually traps them in their own logic just moments before this. Hazlitt is quick to point this out. Shylock's defense against Portia's plea for mercy is built on the Venetians' own systemic cruelty.
Ah, yes. The slavery argument.
Exactly. During the trial, Shylock points to the cognitive dissonance of the Christians. He says, "You have among you many purchased slaves, who you use in abject and slavish parts, like your dogs and mules, simply because you bought them."
If I told you to free them and let them marry your heirs and sleep in soft beds, you would say, the slaves are ours.
Shylock says, "So do I answer you. The pound of flesh is dearly bought, is mine, and I will have it."
He is saying, you Christians buy human beings and treat them like property under the law. I bought this pound of flesh under the law.
You cannot demand I show a moral mercy that you yourselves refuse to practice.
That is the brilliance of Hazlitt's analysis. Shylock exposes that the Venetian legal system isn't built on morality. It's built on property rights and power dynamics.
The Venetians only want mercy when their own necks are on the chopping block.
Shylock refuses triple the money. He refuses all appeals. He demands the strict letter of the law.
So what does this all mean? How does Portia defeat him? Not with moral superiority, not with the gentle rain from heaven.
No. She defeats the letter of the law with a stricter, almost weaponized letter of the law.
She finds a ruthless legal loophole.
She says, the bond allows you a pound of flesh, but the words expressly say a pound of flesh. It does not give you one jot of blood.
If you shed one single drop of Christian blood while cutting the flesh, the laws of Venice state that all your lands and goods are confiscated by the state. It's a technicality. She traps him. It's physically impossible to cut a pound of flesh without spilling blood.
And then, the moment she has him cornered, the mask of mercy completely slips off the Venetians.
Portia pulls out an obscure alien statue.
She says that because Shylock, an alien, plotted against the life of a Venetian citizen, half his wealth goes to Antonio, half goes to the state, and his life lies at the mercy of the Duke.
We must ask the hard questions about this resolution. Does Portia actually practice the mercy she just preached so eloquently about?
By stripping Shylock of his wealth, his livelihood, and forcing him to convert to Christianity, which Antonio demands as a condition of keeping some of his money, isn't the Venetian court just using the law as a different kind of knife?
Hazlitt points out that by the end of this scene, our sympathies completely shift. We pity Shylock.
Hazlitt writes that Shylock is hardly dealt with by his judges and only loses due to a legal flaw.
The Christians, who spent the entire trial weeping for mercy, exact a terrible, crushing, systemic vengeance the moment the power dynamic flips back in their favor.
It is the ultimate example of rules for they, but not for me.
It forces us to ask a very difficult question of ourselves. Think about a time when you were absolutely in the right.
When someone wronged you and you had the receipts, you had the proof, you had the law on your side.
In that moment of absolute power, did you demand your pound of flesh?
Did you exact strict punishing justice just because you could? Or did you leave room for the gentle rain of mercy?
It is incredibly easy to preach about grace when you are the one losing. The true test of your character is whether you can grant mercy when you hold all the cards.
That is the crux of the human dilemma. And it leads us into the final act of the play, which serves as a massive, almost disorienting tonal shift.
We leave the heavy, tragic, brutal business of the Venetian courtroom, and we travel back to the idyllic estate of Belmont.
It is nighttime. The moon is shining. We find Lorenzo and Jessica Shylock's runaway daughter sitting on a grassy bank in the moonlight, listening to music.
Lorenzo sets this incredibly atmospheric scene. He looks up at the sky and says, "How sweet the moonlight sleeps upon this bank. Here will we sit and let the sounds of music creep in our ears. Soft stillness in the night become the touches of sweet harmony."
He starts talking about the stars, calling them patens of bright gold, and he explains the ancient Pythagorean concept of the music of the spheres.
The music of the spheres was the belief that the universe itself, the movement of the planets and stars, creates a perfect, immortal, continuous harmony.
Lorenzo argues that our individual souls are made of this same immortal harmony, but he adds a crucial, tragic caveat.
Whilst this muddy vesture of decay doth grossly close it in, we cannot hear it.
This muddy vesture of decay, that phrase is doing so much heavy lifting.
We need to unpack what he means by that because it ties every single thread we've discussed together.
The muddy vesture of decay is the mortal, flawed human condition.
It represents all the noise, the dirt, and the trauma we accumulate simply by existing in a broken world.
It is our ego. It is the superficial obsession with the gold casket. It is the arrogant, meritocratic illusion of the silver casket.
It is the performative mask of Graciano's oracle.
It is the rank hypocrisy and cognitive dissonance of the Venetians, and it is the consuming, corrosive desire for revenge inside Shylock.
All these things, bigotry, greed, anger, status, anxiety, they are the thick mud that clogs our ears and prevents us from hearing the harmony of the universe and the harmony of our own souls.
And what's brilliant is that it's not just the big systemic evils that make up this muddy vesture. It's the small, intimate, casual cruelties, too.
Think about Jessica. She is sitting there, enjoying the moonlight and the romantic poetry with Lorenzo.
But just a few scenes prior, we learn the devastating detail that she traded a turquoise ring for a pet monkey.
That ring was given to Shylock by his late wife, Leah, before they were married.
When Shylock finds out, he is shattered. He says he wouldn't have traded it for a wilderness of monkeys.
Jessica's casual callousness, her willingness to pawn her father's heartbreak for a momentary amusement, that is part of her muddy vesture.
We are all wearing it. We are all complicit in the noise.
Hazlitt praises this final scene, calling it a graceful winding up of the play, full of beautiful thoughts crowded into that short space.
And the transition Lorenzo makes regarding how we pierce through that muddy vesture is vital.
Lorenzo notes that even a wild, unhandled herd of colts, full of hot blood and savage rage, will stop and stand in a modest gaze if they hear the sweet power of music.
Music, which in this context represents empathy, art, love, and spiritual harmony, has the unique power to change our savage nature.
Lorenzo warns, "The man that hath no music in himself is fit for treasons, stratagems, and spoils. Let no such man be trusted."
We live in a world that is deafeningly loud. The muddy vesture of the 21st century is thick and exhausting.
It's the constant noise of performative social media, the shouty matches of political polarization, the strict, unforgiving legalism of cancel culture, and the systemic prejudices that still alienate people.
And better the instruction of villainy every single day.
Lorenzo is telling us that harmony does not just happen by default.
If we do not actively cultivate the music within ourselves, if we do not purposefully seek out stillness, empathy, vulnerability, and authentic connection, our spirits become dull as night.
We become trapped in the endless muddy cycle of Antonio and Shylock, forever spitting, forever demanding our pound of flesh, forever seeking revenge.
Which brings us to our final image. Portia is returning to Belmont from the wreckage of the trial.
It's dark, and as she approaches her house, she sees a single light burning in her hall.
She stops and observes how far that little candle throws his beams. So shines a good deed in a naughty world.
It is a stunning visual metaphor to close the narrative.
The world is naughty. It is flawed, hypocritical, muddy, and dark.
But a single act of genuine goodness, a true act of unearned mercy, a moment of vulnerability shown, a prejudice actively discarded can pierce that darkness much further than we realize.
Absolutely.
So as you step out of this auditory exploration and back into the reality of your daily life, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder.
If the muddy vesture of decay is blocking your ability to hear the harmony of the universe, what specific noise do you need to silence today?
Is it an old grudge you are feeding and keeping warm like a pet?
Is it a prejudice against someone you've deemed unworthy of your empathy, someone you've written off as an outsider?
Is it the exhaustion of constantly seeking external validation, chasing the gold and silver caskets at the expense of your own peace?
What piece of that muddy vesture can you strip away today? Just enough to let that little candle shine.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.